A standard $400,000 mortgage at today's rates will cost you more than $463,000 in interest before you pay a single dollar of principal, meaning you pay for the house twice, and the second payment goes entirely to the bank. That's confirmed by Bankrate's own amortization data. But here's the part nobody puts in the brochure. In the 10 years between 2014 and 2024, an index fund tracking the same S&P 500, your financial advisor keeps telling you is risky, returned 313.7%. The Vanguard Real Estate Index returned 42. That is not a rounding error. That is 313 versus 42. And it gets sharper from there. According to Hartford Funds, someone who took $153,500, the average home price in 1995, and bought a house instead of an index fund, would have seen it grow to $503,800 by the end of 2024. The person who put that same amount in the S&P 500, more than $3.4 million. Same starting money, same 30 years. 3.4 million versus 500,000. That gap is not volatility. That gap is compounding. And it's the gap that homeownership, dressed up as an investment, has been quietly costing American families for decades. I've been running my own business for over 10 years, surrounded by accountants and tax lawyers who taught me how money actually moves, not how it's sold. I have multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars invested. I have skin in this game, not theory. And the more I dug into the real math of homeownership, the more I understood why the system benefits enormously from keeping that math invisible. Let me show you exactly what's been kept invisible. What I'm going to explain today is how the real estate industry and 50 years of cultural conditioning have sold America the most expensive financial myth of the 20th century, that your primary residence is an investment. It's not. There are three specific mechanisms through which homeownership quietly drains wealth from people who believe they're building it. Most people are aware of one of them. Almost nobody has run all three simultaneously. By the end of this video, you will have done something very few people have ever actually done. Looked at the full picture. Think of your house as the world's most expensive savings account. You deposit a down payment, you make monthly contributions for 30 years, you get a return at the end. Sounds reasonable. Except this savings account charges you maintenance fees, averaging $21,400 per year beyond the mortgage. According to Bankrate's 2025 Hidden Costs of Homeownership study, it locks your money up for decades. If you need to withdraw, the account charges you 8 to 10% of your balance on exit. And the interest rate, the real inflation-adjusted return on this savings account, has historically averaged 0.7% per year. That number comes from economist Robert Shiller's Case-Shiller Home Price Index, the most rigorous long-term data set we have on US residential real estate prices, 0.7% per year. In real terms, I'm going to return to that savings account metaphor throughout this video. Every time I do, I want you to ask yourself, would you open a savings account with these terms? Because that is precisely the question the housing market has been avoiding since your parents told you to buy something with your first paycheck. In a few minutes, I'm going to show you the single calculation that exposes how the homeownership as wealth pitch is built on a math error most people never correct. But first, let me pull apart the foundation, the appreciation story itself, because it does not survive contact with a calculator. Everyone knows real estate goes up. Home prices always go up. Your realtor told you this. The guy at every Thanksgiving dinner has told you this while describing what his house was worth in 2008 versus today. And in nominal terms, he is correct. Since 1963, home prices in America have risen more than 2,350%. Inflation over the same period, 896%. Housing outpaced inflation, therefore housing is a good investment. That logic is actually the problem. Here's the reversal you didn't see coming. Shiller notes that there is a strong perception across the globe that home prices are continuously increasing. He points out that most of the difference between purchase and sale prices can be explained by inflation. He also found that people consistently overestimate the appreciation in the value of their homes. The US Census has been asking homeowners to estimate the value of their homes since 1940. Those estimates reflect an appreciation of 2% per year in real terms, which is significantly more than the 0.7% actual increase reflected in the Case-Shiller Index. 0.7%. The inflation-adjusted, real-world return on the average American home, measured over decades of data by the most respected housing economist alive, is 0.7% per year. The data shows that housing prices were essentially flat for almost 100 years when adjusted for inflation. They fell drastically during the Great Depression of the 1930s. By May of 1975, housing prices in inflation-adjusted terms were only 1.1% higher than they were in 1890. 1.1% higher in 85 years. Now, the pandemic was extraordinary. The post-pandemic era has been extraordinary. But extraordinary runs are precisely what create the illusion that the baseline is better than it is. As of fall 2025, after adjusting for inflation, the National Case-Shiller Composite showed an annual change of negative 2.4%. In September 2025, national home prices were trailing inflation, with inflation running 1.7 percentage points ahead of housing appreciation. In other words, right now, in real terms, the average American homeowner is losing ground. Their house is going up in dollars and going down in purchasing power. This is what the 0.7% long-run average actually looks like when you're inside it. There's a parable I think about whenever someone quotes me their home's appreciation. There was a farmer who had a field he bought for $50,000 in the 90s. 40 years later, his son sold it for $300,000. The family celebrated. They made $250,000. What they didn't calculate was that $300,000 in 2025 has the purchasing power of roughly $130,000 in 1995 dollars at a 3% inflation rate. Their real gain was $80,000 over 40 years on a $50,000 investment. That is less than 3% annualized in real terms. If the father had put $50,000 in an index fund instead, the son would have sold something worth roughly $1.5 million. That's not a hypothetical math problem. That's American family wealth, or the lack of it, visualized. Stay with me, because this is where it starts to get genuinely uncomfortable. You think the appreciation rate is the problem. It's not. The carry cost is the problem. Every asset you own has a carrying cost. Stocks have expense ratios measured in hundredths of a percent. Bonds have similar costs. Your primary residence has a carry cost structure so large that most financial advisors, if they ran it honestly, would classify it as an expense category, not an investment. The average annual costs associated with owning and maintaining a typical single-family home in the US amount to $21,400 in 2025, according to Bankrate's Hidden Costs of Homeownership study. These costs are defined as expenses beyond a mortgage, including property taxes, homeowners insurance, utility and energy costs, internet and cable bills, and home maintenance. $21,400 per year, every year, before you've paid a single dollar of mortgage. That $21,400 represents a 26% increase from 4 years prior, even using the conservative Zillow and Thumbtack estimate of $15,979 annually. The typical US homeowner must budget approximately $1,330 per month in addition to their mortgage payment just to keep the house running and compliant. Now here's the piece of that number that has quietly become a financial emergency for millions of homeowners: insurance. Insurance premiums have surged 48% in the past 5 years nationwide, topping $2,000 annually on the typical home. In Miami, premiums average $4,607 per year, up 72% in 5 years. Other Florida metros have seen similar spikes: Jacksonville, 72%, Tampa, 69%, Orlando, 68%. If you live in any state with meaningful climate exposure, your homeowner's insurance is not a fixed cost anymore. It's a variable. It's a risk you absorb with no ability to diversify, no ability to hedge, and no ability to exit cheaply. Your house is not mobile, Homeowners insurance premiums have surged nearly 70% since 2021, averaging between $2,802 and $3,548 annually in 2025. And then there's the interest. Let's do the clean math on a real house. The total interest paid figure can result in sticker shock for many homeowners. On a $400,000 loan at 6%, you'll pay more than $463,000 in interest over 30 years. This brings the total cost of the loan to more than double the original $400,000 borrowed. There is something deeply strange about that number that most people never sit with long enough. You borrow $400,000. The bank gives you $400,000. You pay back $863,000. That's not a mortgage. That is a subscription to a house. And here's the timing horror buried inside that subscription. On a conventional 30-year fixed loan, the point where more of your monthly payment goes toward principal than interest typically doesn't occur until year 18 or 19. This front loading of interest is why it takes so long to begin building real equity in your property. Year 18. You can be halfway through raising children in this house before the bank stops getting the majority of each monthly check you write. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content. Otherwise, YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. Then comes the exit toll. When you eventually sell, sellers typically pay 8 to 10% of the sale price in closing costs. Between agent commissions, government fees, and a dozen smaller charges, most sellers hand over 8 to 10% of their sale price just to complete the transaction. In 2025, the national average realtor commission is still 5 to 6% of the home's final sale price. On a house that has appreciated from $440,000 to $800,000, which sounds extraordinary. That means surrendering $48,000 to $80,000 at the closing table. The world's most expensive savings account charges you a withdrawal fee of nearly 10%. And it doesn't waive this fee no matter how long you've held the account. Here is the part that almost never makes it into a retirement calculator. Knowing these numbers and building a system around them are two entirely different things. I had this same data several years ago and it didn't change anything in my own planning until I built a framework around it. That's why I put together a digital book called The Exit Code, an analysis of 50 years of retirement data distilled into a mathematical framework for actually exiting the rat race on a specific date, not a someday date. Two things I'd highlight for this specific conversation. First, the 4% trap, the conventional withdrawal rate that almost every retirement calculator still uses, and the dynamic withdrawal method I detail in the book that does a dramatically better job of protecting wealth against a sustained market decline in the early years of retirement. Second, the lazy portfolio, built on 50 years of actual market data, which has historically outperformed active traders and, yes, residential real estate owners over long windows. It's not exciting. That's the point. You can get it through the link in the description for less than a dinner out. Every year you carry costs on an underperforming asset is a year of compounding working against you, not for you. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because everything I've shown you so far is the cost side of the ledger. The interest, the carry, the exit toll, we haven't even touched the opportunity cost, the wealth you're actively destroying by not deploying that capital elsewhere. Let me introduce you to someone. Call him Marcus. Marcus is 40, bought a house in 2019 for $350,000. He got a 2.7 to 5% pandemic era rate and watched the thing nearly double in value. By 2023, he was giving financial advice to his friends. In 2024, a job relocation forced a sale. The house was worth $680,000, a gain of $330,000 on paper. Settlement day came. Realtor fees on $680,000 at 5.7%, $38,760, title, transfer taxes, escrow, $18,000. He had replaced the HVAC in 2021, $12,000. New roof in 2022, $16,000. A kitchen remodel in 2020 to make the house livable, $44,000. Capital gains above the $250,000 single filer exclusion triggered long-term capital gains taxes on the excess, costing another $12,000, Marcus walked away with approximately $189,000 from 5 years of ownership. His neighbor had been renting an equivalent property for $2,000 a month, investing the monthly savings consistently into an index fund. Over 5 years, a window during which the S&P 500 had an exceptional run, that neighbor had accumulated comparable liquid wealth without replacing a single HVAC unit, without negotiating with a single contractor, without watching his property tax assessment increase twice. Marcus made money, let's be clear about that. But he made roughly what his renting neighbor made after 5 years of stress, maintenance, and illiquidity. And his neighbor could deploy his capital anywhere on Monday morning. Marcus had to find another house. I'll come back to Marcus at the end of this video, because the story doesn't stop there. Now, there's an objection that's been sitting in your brain since about 3 minutes in, the one about net worth. Here it is. Federal Reserve data shows total U.S. home equity was over $34 trillion in the third quarter of 2025. The average homeowner is 43 times as wealthy as the typical renter, with homeowners' median net worth at $430,000, compared to just $10,000 for renters, 43 times. The National Association of Realtors uses this number the way a Vegas casino uses the lights. It's designed to create a feeling before you look too closely. Here's why it's the single most misleading true statistic in American personal finance. Imagine I told you that people who own private jets are substantially wealthier than people who fly commercial, and then suggested you should therefore buy a private jet to become wealthy. You'd immediately see the problem. The jet didn't make them wealthy. They were wealthy, so they bought the jet. The causality runs the wrong direction. David Rice, a law professor at Cornell University who studies housing policy, points out there's a bit of a chicken or the egg question when it comes to homeownership and wealth. Does homeownership build wealth? Or do people who build wealth buy homes? There is some truth to the latter, but the general consensus among experts is that homeownership does build wealth. And Reese is intellectually honest about the complexity here. But the industry takes that nuance and markets it as a simple directive. Buy a house and you will become wealthy. People who buy houses are systematically older, more stable, better employed, with better credit, and often with family wealth behind them. The net worth gap between homeowners and renters is substantially explained by who is buying houses in the first place. For minority and low-income communities, homeownership doesn't provide the same level of wealth accumulation. Home values in majority white neighborhoods have risen more, with values in these areas growing $230,000 between 2012 and 2022, compared to $122,500 for majority black neighborhoods over the same time period, according to Redfin. The homeownership builds wealth story is not universally applied. It has always had geography, demographics, and timing embedded in it. And then there is the psychological dimension of all this, which is actually where the deepest damage gets done. Let me give you what I call the 3 hidden taxes on your home. Not the government kind, the structural kind that compounds silently across decades. Hidden tax 1, the inflation illusion. Your house went from $100,000 to $300,000. That happened over 25 years. Inflation averaged approximately 3% annually over that window. $300,000 in year 25 has the purchasing power of roughly $143,000 in year $1. Your real gain is $43,000 over 25 years on a $100,000 investment. That is an annualized real return of approximately 1.4%, better than the historical 0.7% average, but not by much. Not enough to be the cornerstone of your retirement strategy. Hidden tax 2, the carry cost drain. $21,400 per year, compounded across 30 years, is not just $642,000 of spending. It is $642,000 that never had the chance to compound at a 10% annual return. That first year's $21,400 payment represents not just that cash, but its compound value over the subsequent 29 years, which is roughly $350,000 of foregone growth from that single year's expenditure alone. Multiplied across 3 decades, the carry cost structure of homeownership represents not hundreds of thousands, but millions of dollars in wealth that was consumed rather than compounded. There's a reason this feels abstract. The costs arrive one invoice at a time. The leaky faucet, the inspection fee, the property tax reassessment letter in January. When surveyed, 46% of homeowners said they didn't understand the true cost of homeownership before purchasing. And 26% of first-time homeowners didn't realize property taxes fluctuate over time. The system doesn't hide these costs deliberately. It just never presents them in a single line item. Hidden tax 3, the exit toll. We've covered the 8 to 10% transaction cost, but the deeper problem with the exit toll is what it does to your ability to be nimble. Your house is a single concentrated bet on one address, in one zip code, in one city, exposed to one set of local economic risks. You cannot rebalance when your neighborhood starts to soften. You cannot trim your position when mortgage rates spike and buyer demand evaporates. High home prices and interest rates pushed home sales to their lowest level in 30 years as of early 2025. As of early 2025, home prices are up 60% nationwide since 2019 and still rising at a rate of 3.9% year over year. And the median existing single-family home price hit a new high of $412,500 in 2024. A senior research associate at Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies called this a shocking 5 times the median household income. This is also significantly above the price-to-income ratio of 3 that has traditionally been considered affordable, 5 times income. The traditional affordable threshold is 3 times. And yet the cultural script still says, buy a house, it's an investment. There is a phenomenon I think of as equity optimism disorder. It strikes within minutes of closing. A person who has just signed over hundreds of thousands of dollars to a bank somehow feels wealthier than they did that morning. They stand in the empty living room and think, this is mine. It is not exactly theirs. They have a document from a financial institution permitting them to live here as long as they keep paying, never miss a payment, insure the asset adequately, and satisfy property tax obligations to the municipality. That is renting from a bank with considerably more paperwork. Let me make this concrete, with real numbers you can test against your own situation. The median age of first-time home buyers is 38, according to the National Association of Realtors 2024 profile of home buyers and sellers. Let's use that person. You're 38 years old. You're buying a $450,000 house. You put down $90,000, 20% to avoid private mortgage insurance. Your loan is $360,000 at 6.5% for 30 years. Your monthly mortgage payment is approximately $2,275. Your monthly share of hidden costs using Bankrate's national average of $21,400 annually is $1,783 per month. Total monthly cost of owning this home, approximately $4,058. Across most of the US, it costs less each month to rent than to buy. Rent is lower than a typical mortgage payment in 48 of the nation's 50 largest metro areas, according to Realtor.com. A comparable rental for your property, $2,600 per month, which is a reasonable estimate for most large metros. Monthly difference between owning and renting, $1,458. Scenario A. You buy the house. Over 30 years, the house appreciates at the documented historical average of 4.3% annually. From 1991 to 2024, U.S. single-family homes experience an average annual appreciation of approximately 4.3%. The $450,000 house is now worth $1,650,000. You sell, pay 8% in transaction costs, $132,000, and walk away with $1,518,000. Scenario B, you rent. You invest the $90,000 down payment immediately in a low-cost S&P 500 index fund. The S&P 500 has delivered an average annual return of 10.39%, including dividends between 1992 and 2024. According to Investopedia, over the same period, the U.S. housing market provided a 5.5% rate of return. At a conservative 10% annual return over 30 years, $90,000 becomes approximately $1,535,000. You also invest the monthly savings of $1,458 per month consistently. At 10% annually over 30 years, those monthly contributions grow to over $3 million. Total in scenario B, approximately $4.5 million, liquid, diversified, and accessible without paying a realtor. In scenario A, you have a paid off house and $1.5 million. In scenario B, you have $4.5 million and can write a cash offer on any house you want on a Tuesday afternoon. The house in this model costs you $3 million in opportunity. Someone will email me after this video pointing out, I'm not accounting for leverage. And that's fair. Leverage does amplify returns when home prices rise. What the leverage argument consistently fails to include is the HVAC replacement, the flooded basement, the kitchen remodel that cost $44,000 and added $22,000 to the appraisal, the property tax reassessment in year 7, the contractor who never showed up for 3 weeks during the renovation, and the fundamental fact that you cannot put your house in a tax-advantaged account. We can discuss leverage whenever you're ready to discuss all of those simultaneously. Back to Marcus. According to the Federal Housing Finance Agency, as of the first quarter of 2025, 69% of outstanding mortgages had a contract rate of 5% or less, and 24% had a rate less than 3%. Marcus was one of those people. He caught the generational low in mortgage rates. He had the wind at his back for the entire ride. He bought at the right time, in the right market, with the right financing, and he still barely outperformed his renting neighbor on a pure wealth basis. That is the uncomfortable mathematics of homeownership. The best case scenario for owning is often roughly equivalent to the baseline scenario for disciplined investing. And the downside scenarios for owning a forced sale at the wrong time, a neighborhood in decline, a climate-related insurance crisis, a city whose economic engine moves are dramatically worse than holding a diversified index fund through a correction. Last year, monthly mortgage payments on the median priced home rose to $2,570 for terms typical to first-time homebuyers on a 30-year loan with a 3.5% down payment. This record-breaking mortgage payment is 40% higher than it was in 1990, and a buyer would need an annual income of at least $126,700 to afford it with associated taxes and insurance costs. Only 6 million of the nation's nearly 46 million renters can meet this benchmark. 6 million out of 46 million. And the cultural pressure on all 46 million of those renters is to become homeowners as fast as possible. 3 practical things to actually do with this information. First, before you buy anything, calculate the real break-even timeline for your specific market, not national averages. With current rates, current prices at 5 times median income, and hitting costs at $21,400 per year, many buyers in high-cost cities will not financially break even versus renting for 8 to 12 years. That number matters enormously for anyone whose life might change: job, family, city within that window. Second, run the opportunity cost on your down payment before you commit it. Take whatever amount you're planning to put down, compound it at 10% annually for your expected ownership duration, and ask yourself honestly whether the lifestyle value of owning this specific property is worth what that capital could become. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes it's a number that changes the conversation. Third, if you do buy, attack the exit cost relentlessly. The 8 to 10% transaction cost on the way out is the single most controllable variable in this equation. The National Association of Realtors settlement, which took effect in August 2024, reshaped the rules around buyer agent fees. Sellers are no longer required to offer a commission to buyer's agents or advertise it in the MLS. The 6% commission model is fading fast in 2025. Commissions are now more negotiable than at any point in modern real estate history. Flat fee MLS listings exist, discount brokerages exist. Shaving 3 percentage points off your exit cost on a $600,000 house saves $18,000. That is real money that should compound in a real account. The core truth that sits underneath all of this data is simple. Homeownership became America's dominant wealth building strategy, not because it is the most financially efficient path, but because it is the most psychologically accessible one. It's tangible. You can touch it. You can paint the kitchen. Your parents did it. The bank will lend you $400,000 for it at rates it would never offer for a stock portfolio. None of those things make it a good investment. They make it a comprehensible one. And in personal finance, comprehensibility has always commanded a premium over return. Marcus, by the way, bought again. Different city, different market. He's optimistic. I hope he's right. But this time, he ran the numbers first. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. The average American has been told for half a century that the house is the cornerstone of financial security. In too many cases, what they actually built was the cornerstone of the bank's income statement. The house didn't work for them. They worked for the house.